Welcome back, everybody, to Dungeon Brew. Today, Diane and I are going to be talking about storyboarding contingencies in the realm of narrative design. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Dungeon Brew.
Welcome back, everybody, to Dungeon Brew. Today, we are continuing our conversation in narrative design. We're going to be talking about contingencies. How do we storyboard these? How do we really prepare ourselves for the decisions that our characters are going to be making so that we can hopefully run our TTRPG flawlessly? Diana, why don't you start us off by talking about what a contingency is?
Yes, of course. It is like a narrative storyboard or a flowchart that shows you how the NPCs, the quests, the world, everything in your storytelling is impacted by all the possible choices that your characters make. And so it's like, if your character is making one decision, what different outcomes can there be afterwards? And it's kind of like a little web. Every decision that they make, you're going to have a new set of options to go or to get into. But that's the short version there.
Yeah, that's a great explanation, and it really could be challenging for a GM to be able to prepare this if they haven't had honest, straightforward conversations with their player group. I really recommend that you sit down with your players at the end of every session for at least 5 minutes and just say, hey guys, what are you planning on doing next? Where is it that you want to go? Where are you taking the story? Because we have to remember that a TTRPG is unique in the fact that you're telling a story together around the table, and the GM is like the facilitator of that storytelling event. So in order to prepare a really good flow chart, you have to know what the characters plan on doing and what their intentions are so that you can really make the game come to life for them. And it's a very challenging thing to do sometimes because you can't, even in knowing that information, you can't always know exactly what they're going to do with every scenario that you present for them.
Yeah, it's not like writing a book. You can't just pants it. You have to actually plan these things out, which makes it, this whole concept is a little harder for someone like me, a pantser, who just kind of, writes as I go. But if you don't, it makes sense that if you don't kind of keep in touch with your players and kind of know the direction that they're going to go, how in the world are you supposed to have any semblance of a plan? You have there. I think there's a very high chance that they're just going to kind of take you, willy nilly, and you'll lose sight of the storyline in general and end up, in the middle of a desert somewhere when, you're supposed to be out in the, up the mountains mining
Mm-hmm.
something.
Yeah, and that is there's not a lot of tools out there that help you with this process. I mean, for years, GMs have probably just been making little chicken scratches on pieces of paper to try to identify what this looks like, or using their own means to kind of organize it. I know there's a program out there called Twine that can be utilized for this type of conceptualization, but it's really important that you do sit down, like you said, and build a flow chart of these different contingencies so you don't end up out in the middle of nowhere having no idea what's going on because the characters decided to turn left instead of right, and you had nothing planned for when they went left. So one of the things that I would really recommend doing is just thinking about all of the aspects of what we've talked about in the past several videos around system creation. Thinking about your NPCs, the morality and motivations, world building elements, how each of these, the dialogue, how each of these are impacted by the decisions that the characters make. So the characters, for instance, are going to be heading to this castle or this fort, and they want to go speak with the individual that's overseeing that fort. What are the options you're going to offer once they get there? What happens if they say yes? What happens if they say no? What happens if they decide to kill the person that's running the fort? What happens if they decide to just bypass it altogether and go helter-skelter? What do you have planned for them, and how are you going to identify each of those changes in the system based on the decision that they make?
And how are you going to keep that in tune with the overall storytelling? How are you going to keep that from going off, the deep end and going and doing things that, don't make sense with the story, or, the GM maybe won't have, I don't know, maybe I think there's a limit. Like, I imagine there's like some sort of wall around your world. You create your world to a certain extent to the point that you reach these walls and there's no, going past that. And I think that's kind of the overall mentality that you need to go
Mm-hmm.
into when you're creating, any sort of storyboard. There's only so many decisions you could be making really in the end.
Yeah, I think there's a limitation to what our creativity can do, especially on the spot. And I think that you,
Mhm.
as a GM, have to know what your limitations are and how far you're willing to take the story. There comes a certain time where you're no longer telling the story that you were telling at the
Mhm.
beginning of the campaign. And so it's like, okay, are we even playing the same campaign anymore, or have we
Mhm.
completely gone off the deep end? So yeah, and what you're talking about, I think, is the biggest challenge for probably most GMs. It's my characters are choosing to go in this direction. How do I wrap that flow chart back around to come back to the main
Mhm.
quest line that's going through the central piece? How am I reiterating main story elements? How am I connecting new NPCs they're crossing, new cities that they're engaging with, back into the main storyline and how they're being impacted by the overall theme or story of whatever's being
Mhm.
told? Those types of challenges, I think, are questions we have to ask ourselves when we're building those flowcharts.
Yeah, and I think that's where you can kind of start slipping in things like like side quests, to kind of make sure, depending on what actions, if your characters end up doing something super wild, have some kind of side quest available that so maybe an NPC will slip in, and offer this other direction that still keeps you within the story and within that within your world.
And that's actually a great technique to use too when you need to spend some time doing some additional brainstorming on how to bring the players back on track to the main story is throw them into a dungeon. Throw them onto a side quest that is going to take a couple of weeks for them to accomplish so you can come back to your storyboard, your narrative storyboard, and go, all right, they're in a box all the way up here and I need them down here. What type of pathway do I need to build to get them there? And how do I build different contingencies that will eventually get them back onto the main quest?
Yeah, that's a good way to do it. Throw them in a dungeon because they can only do so much and gives you the time as the GM to really start, getting creative and creating, these different sort of new adventures just to get out.
Mm-hmm.
But again, tying it into the initial storytelling.
So I hope this is helpful for you guys. I'm really interested in knowing if there are GMs watching this content, looking at narrative design. What tools do you use? How do you plan for contingencies that are going to occur? What do the conversations look like between you and your characters to help get you on the right track? Let us know in the comments, and how you handle this situation. And again, this is looking at all of the different ways that the world's going to react to the decisions that
Mhm.
characters make.
Yeah, this is everything's going to affect everything that we've talked about, from dialogue to geography to culture to everything.
Mm-hmm.
Everything will be tied into the full aspect of storyboarding.
All right. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and make sure you hit that subscribe button, ding the little bell, and we will see you guys all next time when we talk about narrative design.
Dungeon Brew.